My name is Emily. I never thought a weekend at a lakeside cabin could go so wrong. It was supposed to be a breaker chance to escape the city, unwind, and reconnect with nature. I was wrong. The moment I stepped inside the old cabin, I felt the weight of something heavy pressing down on me. It wasn't the dust, or the old, worn furniture, or the smell of mildew that bothered me. It was something deeper. A sense of being watched. I couldn't shake it, no matter where I went. The walls felt too close. The floorboards creaked under my every step, and outside, the lake stretched out endlessly, dark and deep. The first day was uneventful. I spent most of the afternoon by the water, taking in the view. But as dusk began to settle in, the calm of the lake became unsettling. The water, which had been still and glass-like all day, began to ripple without cause. The air grew colder, and a strange heaviness filled the space around me. I tried to ignore it. After all, I was alone, and I had come here to relax. But when I went back inside to prepare dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence was too thick. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every little sound seem amplified. That night, I went to bed early, hoping to sleep through the unease. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of a voice, a whisper, barely audible. I thought it was just the wind at first, but the voice was too clear, too deliberate. Emily ... I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was coming from the lake. My heart raced, and I pulled the blanket tighter around me, willing myself to ignore it. Emily, come closer ... I felt the weight of the words settle into my chest. It was a voice I didn't recognize, but it felt familiar, too familiar. I tried to close my eyes, to force myself to fall back asleep, but the whispering continued, growing louder with each passing minute. Emily, come to the lake. Something in me snapped. I couldn't resist anymore. I got up, my legs shaking. Beneath me, the cabin felt cold, the air heavy with anticipation, as if something was waiting for me. I stumbled toward the door, pulled it open, and stepped into the night. The lake was dark, almost black, the moonlight barely touching the surface. The whispering was louder now, coming from every direction, like it was all around me. Rising from the water itself, I walked toward the shore, my feet sinking into the cold earth. The closer I got, the more the voices intensified, merging into a chorus of whispers, begging me to come closer, to step into the water. I stopped, just at the edge, my toes brushing the water. The lake seemed to breathe beneath me, ripples forming without any wind to cause them. I could feel it pulling at me, beckoning me closer. Emily ... come deeper ... I stepped forward, my mind screaming for me to turn back, but my body wouldn't. Listen. The water was freezing, sending a shock through my legs as I waded in further. I could feel the pull now, stronger, as if something beneath the surface was reaching up to drag me under. Then I heard it, a sound, a deep, guttural growl coming from the lake's depths. My heart pounded in my chest as something massive stirred beneath the surface. The water churned, and I saw something huge move beneath me, its form barely visible through the murky water. ... Emily ... It called my name, the voice now filled with hunger, with a darkness that chilled me to my core. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs were frozen, weighed down by the water. As the creature's shape grew clearer, emerging from the depths, and then I saw its eyes. Hollow, black eyes that burned with malice. It was a face, but not human. The features were twisted, monstrous, as it surfaced, reaching out toward me with long, webbed hands. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the lake, as the creature dragged me under. My name is Sam. I should have known that a weekend getaway at a secluded lake house was a terrible idea. I'd been searching for a way to escape the noise of the city, but I never expected this place to bring me to the edge of madness. When I arrived. Everything seemed too perfect. The house was isolated, perched on the edge of a serene lake. There were no neighbors for miles, just tall trees that stretched up like silent sentinels. The air was fresh, crisp, the kind of air that cleanses the soul. But something was off. A subtle unease lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. The first night, I felt fine, even peaceful. I sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey, watching the flames dance. The lake, however, didn't seem to be as calm as the rest of the place. Its surface rippled, though there was no wind. It was as if something below the water was stirring, waiting to surface. That night, I woke to the sound of whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps the trees creaking in the dark, but it wasn't. The whispers were coming from the woods though, woods that surrounded the house. The sound was soft, like a chant, low and rhythmical, almost hypnotic. I ignored it, thinking it was nothing more than the wind playing tricks on me. But the next night, the whispers came again, louder this time, more urgent. I stood by the window, staring into the dark expanse of trees. And then, I saw them, dot figures. Shadows moving between the trunks, not quite human, not quite anything. They didn't walk, they glided, as if they were floating just above the ground. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel them watching me. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding. The air felt colder, the temperature dropping suddenly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I opened the door, but the instant my foot hit the porch, the whispers stopped. Everything was silent. Too silent. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the chilly air. I walked toward the woods, my footsteps crunching against the frost-covered ground. The moment I stepped onto the path leading into the trees, the whispers returned, but now they were clearer, louder, surrounding me. "Sam, come closer." I froze. The voice was familiar, yet foreign. It sounded like my own voice, but distorted, as if it had been twisted by the wind. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the trees. That's when I saw her, a woman, standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of the trees. Her long white dress flowed around her like mist. Her face was pale, almost glowing, but her eyes were dark, empty pits that seemed to pull at me, sucking in every ounce of warmth and life. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. The woman stepped closer, her feet never touching the ground. Her lips parted, and once again, I heard my name. "Sam, come to me." I didn't understand why, but I couldn't resist. Slowly, I took a step toward her, then another, drawn in by her presence, as if my body no longer belonged to me. The closer I got, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. The trees twisted and bent, their branches reaching toward me, like hands. I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on my back. The whispers grew louder, maddening. When I was just a few feet from her, I could feel the cold emanating from her, like the touch of death itself. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew she wasn't human. She wasn't even alive. She was something far worse. The moment I reached out to her, everything went black. "My name is Alex." I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I agreed to stay at the lake house for the weekend. A secluded place, surrounded by thick woods, far from the buzz of the city. It was supposed to be peaceful. But now, looking at the water from the dock, I realized that everything was a mistake. It started the night I arrived. The house was old, its floorboards creaking underfoot with each step. The air smelled of damp wood and rot, though the owner swore it was just the house's character. But what got my attention was the lake. It was enormous, its surface still as glass, reflecting the moonlight like a perfect mirror. Too perfect. The first night, I heard nothing. Silence, like the kind you only find in the deepest corners of the world. But by the second day, I felt a unsettling presence. Like someone was watching me from the shore, or perhaps from beneath the water. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. The second night, it became harder to ignore. I went to bed early, hoping a full night's sleep would calm my nerves. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound of soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. My heart raced, and I couldn't breathe. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. Nothing. The lake was still, but when I turned back to the window, my reflection wasn't mine. I could see myself, but not as I was. It was like someone else was inside me, staring back from the glass. I jumped out of bed, stumbling backward, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I was alone in the room, but the image in the window never left. It seemed to shift, like it was watching me, studying me, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling. The reflection, whatever it was, stayed with me as I moved through the house. Every time I passed a window, I could feel its gaze, lurking just behind my own reflection. At times, I thought I saw the figure moving, but when I turned to look, the room was always empty. The next morning, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. I hoped the fresh air would clear my mind, maybe even help me find a rational explanation. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear footsteps in the distance, always behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. Eventually, I reached the edge of the lake, where a small boat was docked. It looked abandoned, covered in algae, but something about it called to me. Without thinking, I climbed in and paddled out, hoping the isolation of the water would calm my nerves. The farther I drifted from shore, the more suffocating the silence became. The lake felt ... wrong. It wasn't just still, it was too still. The air hung thick around me, the weight of the world pressing in from all sides. I was about to turn back when I heard the softest whisper, like a voice coming from beneath the water. "Come closer." I froze. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It was a woman's voice, smooth and haunting, like it was calling me from the depths of the lake itself. "Who's there?" I whispered, my pulse racing. The water beneath the boat shifted, a ripple forming out of nowhere. Slowly, I leaned over the edge to look. The water was murky, darker, sharp contrast to its usual clarity. And then I saw it. A face. A pale, twisted face that barely resembled a human. Eyes wide and empty, locked onto mine. I yanked myself back, knocking the oar into the water, sending the boat spinning in a wild circle. My heart pounded, and I could barely breathe. The whisper came again, but this time, it was louder, more insistent. "Come closer, Alex." I turned the boat around with shaking hands, paddling as hard as I could. The water seemed to resist, pushing against me, the whisper growing louder with each stroke. My head spun. The face was still there, beneath the water, staring up at me. I didn't dare look back as I sped toward the shore. When I finally made it back to the house, my body was trembling, drenched in sweat. The lake was calm again, its surface as smooth as glass. But the whisper didn't stop. It echoed in my mind, growing louder, louder, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it in my head or from the lake itself. That night, I locked every window, bolted the doors, but sleep didn't come. The reflection returned. It was waiting for me in the glass, staring back with those empty eyes. But now, it moved. Slowly, it tilted its head to one side, and in the reflection, I saw something else, something beneath the surface. The figure. In the water, its pale hand rising, reaching for me. I'm trapped here. I can't leave. The lake won't let me go, and I know it's only a matter of time before the reflection comes for me. ... before it drags me down into the depths. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But From the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water. Cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing, shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale, waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Adam, and I don't go near lakes anymore. I had always loved the water, which is why I agreed to house-sit my uncle's lake house for a week. It was supposed to be an easy gig-relax fish, maybe do some riding. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something metallic, almost like rust. The lake stretched endlessly before the house, black as ink. When I stood on the dock, I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, but the ripples vanished before I could be sure. That night, I woke up gasping. A voice had whispered my name. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The house was silent, the only sound the occasional creak of the wooden walls settling. But then, I heard it again, soft, wet, like a breath bubbling up through water. Adam. I grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the window. The dock was empty. The lake was still. But something about the reflection in the water was wrong. I moved closer. The surface was perfectly smooth, like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the sky, the trees, the house. But not me. My breath hitched. I waved a hand. Nothing. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. That's when I heard the first footstep, a wet, slapping sound coming from the dock. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, and my stomach twisted. A figure stood there, dripping pale, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes black voids, staring right at me. It opened its mouth, and I heard my own voice. Help me. I slammed the curtains shut and locked the door, my hands trembling. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved closer, up the porch steps. Then came the knocking, slow, deliberate. I pressed my back against the wall, barely breathing. The knocking stopped. Then, the whisper came from inside the house. Let me in. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner until the first light of dawn. When I finally gathered the courage to check the dock, it was empty. The water was still, but my footprints were there, leading from the lake to my door. I left that morning and never returned. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't want to. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear it whispering my name, calling me back to the water. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But from the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave. But the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale, waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Daniel, and I never believed in ghosts until I met my own. I had rented the lake house for a weekend retreat, hoping to disconnect from the world. The place was serene, nestled between towering pines, its wooden dock stretching over the vast lake. The first day passed uneventfully, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, an uneasy feeling crept in. That night, I woke to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was a tree branch brushing against the window, but when I sat up, I realized it was coming from below. It was faint, rhythmic, like knuckles rapping against wood. I hesitated before getting out of bed. The sound continued as I crept toward the window, peering out into the moonlit darkness. The lake was still, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the starlit sky. And then I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the dock, staring down into the water. Its posture was rigid, its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the surface. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make out any features, only a silhouette against the dark. I turned away for a split second, reaching for my phone. When I looked back, the dock was empty. The next morning, I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself it was just my imagination. I spent the day exploring the nearby trails, avoiding the dock entirely. But as night fell, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder. I clutched a flashlight and hesitantly stepped outside. The cool night air pressed against me as I made my way toward the dock. The lake was still a mirror, reflecting my hesitant steps as I peered over the edge. My reflection stared back at me. Then it blinked. My own face twisted into something unnatural, a grin stretching wider than it should, eyes dark and hollow. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The reflection moved independently, reaching out toward me from beneath the water. I ran back inside. I locked every door, every window, but I could still hear it, the tapping. Faster now, insistent. At midnight, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Then, from outside, I heard the creak of wooden planks. Something was walking on the dock. I didn't wait to see what it was. Grabbing my keys, I bolted for my car, adrenaline drowning out every rational thought. As I sped away, I caught one last look in my rearview mirror. A figure stood on the dock, watching me leave, and in the still water below, its reflection waved. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights, alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But, from the moment I arrived, something felt ... wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing, shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale. Waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass, their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Eric, and I thought a weekend at the lake house would be peaceful. I was wrong. I arrived late in the evening, the sun just dipping below the tree line. The house was old but sturdy, perched at the water's edge like it had been waiting for me. As I stepped onto the dock, a chill ran down my spine. The lake was unnaturally still, the water black and depthless. It felt like something was watching me. That night, I awoke to a strange sound, like something heavy, scraping against the dock outside. I hesitated, then forced myself to look out the window. The lake stretched out before me, undisturbed, but then I saw it. Something was floating just beneath the surface, a pale shape, barely visible in the moonlight. It wasn't a log or debris. It was a face, eyes wide open, staring UNMOVING. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. When I looked again, it was gone. The next day, I convinced myself I had imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I felt unseen eyes burrowing into me from the water. That evening, I sat on the dock, trying to clear my mind. That's when I saw bubbles rising, breaking the surface. Something was moving beneath me. Then, a hand shot up from the water, grasping at the dock's edge. I scrambled back, my heart hammering. The hand was bloated and pale, fingers stretching toward me before slipping back into the depths. The water rippled violently, then went still. I wanted to leave, but my keys were gone. I searched frantically, overturning everything in the house. I was trapped for one more night. At midnight, the house groaned as if it were breathing. The temperature plummeted. Then came the knocking, slow, deliberate, coming from the floorboards beneath me. My blood turned to ice. The knocking grew louder, more urgent, until suddenly, the wooden planks of the floor split open with a sickening crack, and the water rushed in. Hands reached up from below, grasping, clawing, pulling me toward the icy depths. I screamed, struggling against their grip. Just as my vision blurred, the house shuddered and went still. The water was gone. The floor was intact, but the air reeked of rot and lake water. At dawn, I found my keys sitting in the middle of the dock, wet and covered in silt. I didn't question it. I ran to my car and never looked back. As I drove away, I stole one last glance at the lake house in my rearview mirror, and on the dock stood a figure, watching me leave. It had my face. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights, alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But, from the moment I arrived, something felt ... wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly, a child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was 1 story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale, waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me, their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. Asterisk. My name is Daniel, and I don't know if what I saw was real or if I was losing my mind. I rented a lake house for a weekend of solitude. No distractions, no noise, just me, my thoughts, and the open water. The first day was peaceful. The second was not. It started with the mirror. The lake house had a large antique mirror hanging in the living room, positioned so you could see the water through its reflection. I barely paid attention to it till I noticed something wrong. I was standing in front of it, sipping my coffee, when I saw the lake's reflection shift. The water in the mirror wasn't still like in real life. It rippled. Something dark moved. Beneath its surface, I turned to the window. Nothing. The real lake was as still as ever. But when I looked back into the mirror, I saw her. A woman, standing at the water's edge, her back to me. She was dressed in something tattered and old, her long hair dripping wet. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly turned to the window. She wasn't there. But in the mirror, she took a step closer. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my coffee. My mind raced for an explanation. Some trick of the glass, an illusion, exhaustion. I refused to believe what I was seeing. But that night, I heard the knocking, soft, rhythmic, coming from the window facing the lake. I held my breath, heart hammering. The knocking came again. I forced myself to look. There was no one there then. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned toward the mirror. The woman was inside it now, standing within the reflection of my living room. But she wasn't just standing anymore. She was knocking. I bolted out of the house, into the freezing night. The sky was empty, the lake undisturbed, but I could still hear the knocking from inside, louder, more desperate. I ran to my car and drove until I couldn't see the lake anymore. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if she was ever real, but I do know this. When I checked my phone the next morning, I found a single new photo in my camera roll, a picture of the lake house, and, in the window, the reflection of a woman staring back at me. My name is Elliot. I should have never come to this lake house. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. My best friend Jake had inherited the cabin from his late uncle and invited me to spend a few days there. The idea of an isolated retreat by the water seemed perfect until the first night. The cabin was old but sturdy, with creaky wooden floors and a musty scent that hinted at years of abandonment. The lake stretched infinitely beyond the dock, its surface eerily still, reflecting the dense pines surrounding it. Something about the silence unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper. It came from outside, near the water. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rustling through the trees, but then I heard it again. A voice, low and mournful, calling a name I couldn't make out. I shook Jake awake. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He groaned and rolled over. "It's just the lake, man. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch. The air was thick with mist, making it impossible to see the water clearly. Then, I saw a movement by the dock. A figure, standing at the edge, staring at the lake. "Hello," I called out, my breath visible in the cold night air. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless. My heart pounded as I stepped closer. The wood of the dock groaned beneath my feet. When I was only a few steps away, the figure turned. It was a woman, her face pale and waterlogged, her hair dripping as if she had just emerged from the lake. Her eyes, empty and lifeless, locked onto mine. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled backward. The dock beneath me felt like it was shifting, tilting towards the water. The woman took a step forward, and suddenly, she was gonna vanish into thin air. But the whisper remained, echoing in my ears. I ran back inside, bolting the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried to wake Jake again, but he was in a deep, unnerving sleep. I stayed awake until dawn, every creak of the house making me flinch. The next morning, I found footprints on the dock. Wet, barefoot prints, leading from the water to where I had seen her. And then stopping abruptly, I packed my bags and left without a word. Jake stayed behind, laughing off my fears. But as I drove away, I saw something in my rearview mirror. Jake, standing on the dock, staring at the lake, and behind him, the pale figure of the woman, whispering in his ear. I never went back. My name is Aaron, and I swear to you, there is something in that lake. My girlfriend, Claire, and I had been searching for a quiet getaway when we stumbled upon the lake house listing. Secluded, peaceful, and surrounded by dense forest. It seemed perfect. We booked it for the weekend, eager for some time away from the city. From the moment we arrived, I felt uneasy. The lake was too still, the air too thick, the silence too absolute. Claire laughed off my concerns, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. That night, as we lay in bed, I awoke to the sound of splashing. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy moving in the water. I turned to Claire, but she was fast asleep. I got up, moving to the window. The moon was high, its pale glow casting an eerie reflection on the lake. And then I saw it. A hand, not floating, not sinking, but reaching out of the water, fingers curled like they were grasping for something. No, someone. My breath hitched as I took a step back. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but before I could process what I was seeing, the hand slipped beneath the surface. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that I was imagining things, that I was just tired, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the cabin sent a shiver down my spine. The next morning, Claire went for a swim. I protested, but she just rolled her eyes. "You're being paranoid," she teased before diving in. I watched from the dock, stomach tight with unease. Then she screamed. I sprinted toward the water. Claire was thrashing, eyes wide with terror. "Something grabbed me," she gasped, kicking toward the shore. I waded in, grabbing her arm and pulling her onto the dock. Her leg was bleeding, deep red spreading through the water. There were handprints on her ankle. Bruised, bony fingers imprinted into her skin. We left everything behind: our bags, our food, even my car keys. We ran barefoot through the woods until we found the nearest road, where a passing driver picked us up. When the authorities arrived, they found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No footprints except our own. The lake was still and empty, as if nothing had happened. But Claire and I both know the truth. Something lives beneath that lake. And it wants to pull you under.